My family had a word for everything I did wrong, and that word was practical, not a compliment. The way my mother said it, lips slightly pursed, head tilted just enough to signal disappointment, Nora's always been the practical one. It landed somewhere between pity and dismissal. Like being good with numbers was something that happened to a person, the way bad weather happened, or bad luck. My sister was the one who got the other words. Creative, spontaneous, passionate. My mother said those with warmth, the way you describe someone you actually enjoy. My sister had grown up knowing she was loved out loud. I had grown up knowing I was tolerated quietly. She was 3 years older than me and had spent most of her adult life moving between cities, reinventing herself every 18 months or so. She'd been a jewelry designer, then a wellness coach, then a real estate investor, then a life strategist, whatever that meant. Each pivot came with a new wardrobe, a new circle of friends, and a new story she told at dinner parties about her journey. My parents funded most of it. They called it believing in her potential. I called it a revolving line of credit with no repayment plan. I'd taken a different road. Accounting degree, then a master's in forensic finance, then 7 years building a career at a federal financial crimes investigation unit. I spent my days untangling fraud, corporate embezzlement, tax evasion, asset concealment. I was good at it. Not the interesting kind of good, apparently. Just the kind that gets things done and doesn't make for great dinner table conversation. My parents never asked what I was working on. They asked how my commute was. I hadn't planned to go home for my parents' 30th anniversary party. It wasn't that I didn't love them. It was that going home felt like voluntarily stepping into a production where my role had already been written and the reviews were never good. But my father called me himself, which was rare. He said, "Please come, Nora. It would mean a lot to your mother." And because I'd spent a lifetime confusing guilt with love, I booked the flight. I arrived on a Friday afternoon in late September, when the leaves on the old maples in the front yard had just started turning. The house looked the same as it always did: white siding, green shutters, the slightly uneven porch step that had been meant to be fixed since 2009. My mother met me at the door with a hug that lasted exactly 3 seconds, which I had learned was her baseline. Not cold, just calibrated. My sister was already there. Of course she was. She'd driven up from wherever she was currently living, some converted warehouse loft, in a neighborhood she described in a group text as up and coming, and she had made herself completely at home in the way people do when they've never really left a place, even after they technically did. She was in the kitchen when I walked in, leaning against the counter with a glass of white wine in her hand, telling my mother some story about a property deal that had nearly fallen through. She looked up when I came in, smiled wide, and said, "Nora, finally." Like I was late, even though the party wasn't until tomorrow. I set my bag down. "Hey." My mother turned with that particular brightness she reserved for moments, when she wanted everyone to pretend everything was fine. Both my girls under one roof. Doesn't that make me lucky? My father came in from the backyard, still in his work clothes, a little slower than I remembered. He was 63 now, and he'd had a minor cardiac event the previous spring, something my mother had mentioned in an email the same way she might mention a change in the weather. He hugged me longer than my mother had. "You look tired," he said. "I'm fine," I said. "You look good." He didn't, entirely, but that wasn't the conversation we were going to have right then. Dinner that night was the usual performance. My sister held court at the table, filling every silence with something about herself, a trip she was planning, a client who adored her, a deal she was close to closing. My mother laughed at her jokes. My father smiled. I ate my chicken and nodded at the appropriate intervals. At some point, my sister leaned toward me with that generous expression she wore when she wanted to seem like she was including me in something. "So, Nora, how's the number crunching going?" "Good," I said. "Caught a man last month who'd been hiding $12 million across 14 shell accounts. So, productive." She blinked, then laughed. "God, you always make everything sound so serious." My mother patted her hand. "She's just dedicated. That's how Nora is." Dedicated was another word they used. Like practical. It wasn't a compliment. It meant, you work too much, you take things too seriously, you make us vaguely uncomfortable with how hard you try. Dedicated. I smiled and poured myself more water. After dinner, While my mother and sister stayed in the kitchen opening another bottle of wine, I helped my father carry dishes and, without really planning to, ended up sitting at the kitchen table with him while he drank his decaf. He seemed tired in a way that wasn't just physical. Quiet, in a way that had weight to it. "You doing okay?" I asked. He wrapped both hands around his mug. "I've been thinking about some things," he said. "Want to make sure everything's in order. You know. After everything this spring," I nodded. "The cardiac event. The kind of scare that makes people suddenly want to talk about wills and paperwork and in order. You should talk to your attorney," I said. "Make sure your estate documents are updated." "We did," he said. "A few months ago. Changed some things." He paused. "Your sister helped me set up a new account. Transfer of some savings. She said it would make things easier." Something in my chest went still. Not alarm yet, just attention. The particular sharpening of focus I'd trained for years. "What kind of account?" "A joint one. For management purposes," she said. "So she could help me move money around, pay things, since I've been slower since the hospital." I kept my voice even. "Whose names are on it?" "Mine and hers." He shrugged. "She said it was just practical." There was that word again. I didn't say anything else that night. I helped him finish the dishes, said goodnight, and went upstairs to the room that had been mine growing up, still with the same desk, same window, same faint smell of old books and cedar. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my laptop. I wasn't snooping. Not yet. I was just thinking. Running patterns the way I always did, because pattern recognition is not something I turned off when I clocked out. It's not something I knew how to turn off at all. My sister, who had no stable income and a history of pivoting every 18 months, had convinced my father, who had recently survived a cardiac event and was emotionally vulnerable, to add her name to a joint account with access to his savings. Without telling my mother, apparently, because my mother had said nothing about it. Without including me, certainly. I thought about the 12 million hidden across 14 shell accounts I'd unraveled the month before. About how those things always started the same way, not with theft, but with access. Someone getting close. Someone making it seem like they were helping. I did not sleep well. The next morning, I came downstairs early. My mother was still asleep. My father was at the kitchen table with his coffee and the newspaper, which he still got delivered in print because he'd been doing it for 40 years and didn't see why he should stop. My sister wasn't up yet. I made coffee, sat across from him, and asked, as casually as I could, whether I could take a look at the new account setup. He looked mildly surprised, then mildly relieved, the way people look when someone finally asks the question they'd been half hoping someone would ask. He went and got his reading glasses and a folder from the drawer by the phone, the same drawer that had always held takeout menus and expired coupons, and apparently now also held financial documents, and handed it to me. I read through it carefully. The account had been opened 4 months ago. Joint access, both signatures required for certain transaction types. Except the authorization document attached had only one signature, and it was dated differently from the account opening date, and the notarization stamp had a slight irregularity. I recognized immediately because I had spent years learning to recognize exactly that kind of irregularity. The font, the spacing, the seal orientation. I read it again. Then I took a photo of every page with my phone. I put the folder back, closed it gently, and told my father the coffee was good. He smiled and went back to his newspaper. I went upstairs, closed my bedroom door, and opened the secure work app on my phone. I typed a message to my colleague Marcus, who covered financial document analysis in our division. "Can you pull up a reference template for notary seals in this state, circa the past 2 years? Need to compare something. Not urgent, but soon." He replied within 20 minutes with a link and 3 images. I compared them to the photo I'd taken. The seal on my father's document was not current. It matched a format that had been retired 18 months ago when the state updated its notary certification standards. Whoever had notarized this document, or whoever had created the appearance of notarization, had used an outdated template. I sat with that for a while. My sister had been home 3 weeks ago. She had mentioned it in passing, in a group text, something about helping Mom with yard things. My father hadn't mentioned that visit on the phone when he called to invite me. Maybe it hadn't seemed relevant. Maybe he hadn't been sure what was relevant anymore since the spring. I went back downstairs and asked my father, very gently, if he remembered signing the authorization form for the joint account. He thought for a moment. Said he thought so. Said it was a lot of paperwork, honestly, and his sister had walked him through most of it, and he trusted her. Of course, I said. That makes sense. My sister came down at 10:30 in a linen blouse and good earrings, the kind of effortless presentation that takes an hour and is designed to look like it took 5 minutes. She made herself toast, kissed my father on the cheek, and asked me how I'd slept. Fine, I said. You? Like a rock, she said. I always sleep well here. She said it with that particular comfort of someone who had never felt like a guest in this house. I watched her butter her toast. She had our father's hands' broad palms, short nails. He used to say she looked more like him. He used to say it proudly. After breakfast, I excused myself to make some calls, went back to my room, and called Marcus directly. I walked him through what I had. The account structure, the signature authorization, the notary seal irregularity. I sent him the photos. He was quiet for a moment after I finished. You know what this looks like, he said. I know what it looks like, I said. Are you sure you want to go here? It's your family. I thought about my father's hands wrapped around his coffee mug the night before. The way he'd said she said it would make things easier with that particular tone people use when they want to believe something is true and have mostly stopped questioning whether it is. Pull the account activity for the past 4 months, I said. I'll get you the account number. He pulled it. I had the number from the folder my father had shown me. The account had received 2 transfers from my father's primary savings in the past 3 months. The first was $40,000. The second, 6 weeks later, was $60,000. Both had been initiated from the joint account side, meaning the access point was my sister's credentials. Neither transfer had a corresponding invoice, payee, or documented purpose on file. $100,000. I put my phone down on the bed and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. The anniversary party started at 4. 30 guests, my parents' friends, their neighbors, a few of my father's colleagues from before he'd retired. My mother had rented linens and ordered a cake and spent 2 weeks on the seating arrangement. It was going to be lovely. She'd said so approximately 11 times in the past 6 months. I came downstairs at 3:30, dressed and composed. My sister was already in the living room helping arrange centerpieces, laughing about something with my mother. My father was at the kitchen table in his good suit, looking quietly proud of everything around him. I went and sat next to him. Dad, I said quietly. Do you know how much money has come out of the new joint account in the past few months? He looked at me, mild confusion on his face. She mentioned some investments, moving money around for better returns. She knows more about that than I do. Did she give you documentation? Statements? Anything in writing about where the money went? He frowned now. I assumed she'd handle that. She's good with financial things. I put my hand over his. I need you to trust me for the next little while, okay? I'm going to need to make a couple of calls, and I need you to not say anything to anyone until I do. He looked at me for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted, not panic, but recognition. The look of a man who had maybe already known something was wrong and had been waiting for someone to say it first. Okay, he said. I stepped outside onto the porch, called Marcus, and told him I was ready to file a formal referral. Suspected financial elder abuse. Unauthorized account access. Possible document fraud. He walked me through the intake process, which I already knew but went through anyway because doing it out loud made it real in a way that the thinking about it hadn't quite been. Before I hung up, Marcus said, I have to ask. How are you doing? I'm fine, I said. Let's get the report submitted before the guests arrive. We got it submitted at 3:52. The party started. I smiled and shook hands and accepted a glass of sparkling water and watched my sister move through the room like she owned it, charming everyone she spoke to, laughing that big, bright laugh she'd always had. My mother glowed. My father mostly sat and received congratulations and looked at his wife with the particular softness of someone who had loved the same person for 30 years and found it surprisingly uncomplicated. I kept my phone in my jacket pocket. At 6, while the cake was being brought out, I excused myself to the hallway and took a call from a colleague named Detective Linden at the County Financial Crimes Unit, who had received the referral and had a few questions. I answered them quietly, methodically, the way I answered questions in the office. Dates, amounts, account numbers, document irregularities. He was professional and fast. "We'll need the original documents," he said, "and we'll want a formal statement from the account holder." "I can arrange that," I said. "How soon can you get us the originals?" "Tonight, if necessary. Let's say tomorrow morning. But don't let them leave the premises." I went back into the party. My sister was cutting the cake. My father was laughing at something one of his old colleagues had said. I stood in the doorway and watched them for a moment, the chandelier light, the flowers my mother had fussed over, the whole careful construction of a family celebrating something real. Then I walked over to my sister. She looked up with that smile, easy, reflexive. "There you are. I thought you'd disappeared. Can I talk to you for a minute? Right now?" "We're doing the cake. It won't take long." Something in my tone got through. She handed the serving knife to my mother, told her she'd be right back, and followed me into the hallway. I kept my voice very low and very even. "I know about the account. I know about the transfers. I know the authorization document was notarized with an outdated seal, which means it's going to be very difficult to explain how it's valid." I paused. "I filed a referral this afternoon. Financial crimes. They'll want the original documents tomorrow morning." She stared at me. For a full 3 seconds, nothing moved in her face. Then she laughed. "What are you talking about?" $100,000, I said. "In 3 months. No documented purpose, no statements, no paper trail beyond the transfer records." Her jaw tightened. "I've been managing his accounts. He asked me to." "You can ask him." I did ask him. "He didn't know the money had moved." Her voice dropped. "You had no right to go through his financial records." "He showed them to me voluntarily," I said. "And I'm a forensic financial investigator. It's a little hard for me not to notice a fraudulent notary seal." "It's not fraudulent. The format was retired 18 months ago. I have the state's current specifications on my phone if you'd like to compare." She went very still. The laugh was gone now. Behind us, in the other room, I could hear my mother saying something and people clapping, probably for the cake. "This is my family too," she said, and her voice had changed, quieter, something underneath the confidence now. "I know," I said. "That's why I'm telling you before anyone else does." She looked at me for a long moment. I had seen that look before, not on her, but on the other side of conference tables, in rooms where people were realizing that the thing they thought would stay quiet was not going to stay quiet. "They'll believe me," she said finally. "They always believe me." "This isn't about believing," I said. "It's about account records and document authentication. Those things don't have opinions." She walked back into the party. I watched her go, watched her pick up the serving knife like nothing had happened, watched my mother touch her arm and say something that made her smile. The smile looked almost right. My father found me in the hallway a few minutes later. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me with those eyes that had always known me better than he let on, and waited. "It's being handled," I said. He nodded slowly. Then he said, "She's still my daughter." "I know. So are you." He went back to his party. I stood in the hallway for another moment, then took out my phone and sent Marcus a confirmation message that the referral information was complete. The next morning was a Tuesday. I drove my father to the County Financial Crimes Office at 9 a.m., which was 9 blocks from the house in a building that looked like every government building I had ever been inside: beige walls, fluorescent lights, the smell of institutional coffee. Detective Linden met us in the lobby. He was younger than I'd expected, calm-voiced, and treated my father with the particular careful patience that people in his work learn to use with older adults navigating things they didn't fully understand. My father gave his statement. He confirmed that he had not knowingly authorized the transfers. He confirmed that the signature on the authorization form did not look right to him, now that he was looking at it again. He confirmed that he had trusted his daughter and had not been in a position, after the hospital, to scrutinize things the way he once would have. He said that last part quietly. It was the hardest thing he said. I submitted the original documents from the folder. Linden's colleague took them, processed them into evidence, and gave my father a receipt. The whole thing was orderly and thorough and about as undramatic as the truth tends to be when it's well documented. My sister had not been at breakfast that morning. Her car was still in the driveway when we left. It was not there when we returned. She called my mother from the road, apparently. My mother came to find me in the kitchen when we got back, and she stood in the doorway with the look of a woman whose world had just been reorganized without her permission. She was not crying. She was past crying, into something colder. "She says you're destroying the family," she said. I poured coffee. "The account records destroyed themselves, Nora." Her voice broke on the second syllable. "Mom." I turned to face her. "She took $100,000 from Dad's savings. He didn't know. She used a document that wasn't properly notarized to set up the access. This is not a misunderstanding. She said she was going to pay it back." "She said that to you?" "She said she needed it for an investment that was going to take care of all of us. She said she was going to." "Mom." I kept my voice steady. "Did she tell Dad that?" My mother closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, something had shifted. Not acceptance. Not yet. Just the beginning of it. "He's so upset," she said, very quietly. "I know," I said. "He will be." Was there any other way to handle this? I thought about it honestly. Not the way I wanted to answer, but the way things actually were. If I'd let it go, she would have kept going. That's how this works. Access is access. There's no reason to stop when no one's watching. My mother didn't answer. She sat down at the kitchen table and put her hands flat on the surface, the way she always had when she was collecting herself, and looked at the grain of the wood. I sat across from her. "She's my daughter," she said. Finally. "I know. How do I go from that to?" She couldn't finish the sentence. "You don't have to figure that out today." She looked up at me. "You don't seem upset." I thought about the right way to answer that. "I'm very upset," I said. "I've just had a lot of practice not looking it." She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. It lasted longer than 3 seconds. I counted. The formal charges came 6 weeks later. Document fraud, financial elder abuse, unauthorized account access, 3 felonies. My sister had hired a private attorney, a man from a firm downtown who I was told was very skilled at finding technicalities. I was told this by my sister's attorney himself, who called me once to suggest that if I were to provide a statement characterizing the situation as a family misunderstanding, it might significantly affect the outcome. I told him the account records and the document authentication report were already in evidence, and that my personal characterization of the situation was irrelevant to either of those. He did not call again. I had to give a formal statement to the district attorney's office, which I did in the same manner I gave all my professional statements, methodically, precisely, without editorializing. The DA's paralegal told me afterward that I was the clearest witness she'd worked with in 2 years. I thanked her and asked where I could get decent coffee nearby. The hearing was in November. Gray morning, the kind of cold that comes with full intention. I wore my good coat and drove my father to the courthouse because he'd asked me to. My mother sat on the other side of him, the 3 of us in a row, which was not something that had happened in any configuration I could remember. My sister sat with her attorney across the aisle. She was dressed conservatively, which her attorney had clearly advised. She looked at me once when I walked in. I held the look until she was the one who turned away. The attorney made his argument about context, about family dynamics, about the complicated love between sisters, and a father's willingness to be helped. He was skilled. He hit the emotional notes in the right order. He talked about my sister's passion, her potential, her difficult year financially. He called the account setup a well-intentioned but imperfect attempt to help. Then the DA's office presented the account records, the transfer documentation, the forensic analysis of the notary seal, which had been completed by the state's document authentication office, and confirmed my initial assessment. The seal template had been digitally reproduced from an archived version, decommissioned 18 months prior. The DA read from the report without drama. Just facts, delivered in sequence, like a ledger. $100,000. 2 unauthorized transfers, a fraudulent document used to establish access, the timeline, beginning 4 months after my father's hospitalization. The judge was a woman in her mid-50s with reading glasses on a chain and the expression of someone who had heard many explanations for many things. She listened to both sides with the same patient stillness, made a few notes, asked 2 questions about the account authorization process. When she spoke to the room, but her eyes settled on my sister. "The evidence in this case," she said, "is not ambiguous. Document fraud is not a matter of intention. The use of a retired notary seal format to authorize financial access is not something that happens by accident, and the withdrawal of $100,000 from a vulnerable adult's account without his knowledge or consent is not a misunderstanding." My sister's attorney started to rise. The judge held up one hand, and he sat back down. "The defendant's personal circumstances do not change the nature of the conduct," the judge continued. "They may inform sentencing. They do not inform guilt." She set her papers down. "This court finds sufficient grounds to proceed to trial on all 3 counts. Bail is set. The defendant is to have no contact, direct or indirect, with the victim." She paused. "And to be direct, the evidence your own family member documented and submitted to this court is exceptionally thorough. I would encourage the defense to consider that carefully going forward." She looked at my sister's attorney. "You may want to advise your client to think about her options." The gavel came down. The sound was clean and final, the way real things tend to be when you stop arguing with them. My sister's attorney was already leaning toward her, whispering. My sister sat very still. She looked smaller than she had when she walked in. That's the thing about courtrooms, they have a way of removing the performances people build around themselves, until what's left is just a person with the consequences of their choices. I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired and sad and certain, which is a combination that doesn't have a clean name but is very recognizable once you've felt it. My father gripped the armrest when he stood. I steadied him with one hand. Outside, the air was sharp with the cold. Detective Linden was on the steps, nodded at me when we came through the doors. "Well-built case," he said. "Evidence builds itself," I said. "You just have to look." My mother held my father's arm on the other side. She hadn't said much that morning. At the top of the courthouse steps, she stopped and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from her before, not the tight, managed approval she usually offered, not the cheerful deflection, something truer. "I didn't know," she said. "I want you to know that. I didn't know what she was doing." "I believe you," I said, and I did. "I also," she paused, choosing carefully. "I think I made things harder for you than I should have." For a long time, I didn't say anything for a moment. We stood there in the November cold, and I thought about all the ways I could answer that, and which one was true, and which one was useful, and whether those were the same thing. "Yeah," I said, finally. "You did." She nodded, a small nod. Not an apology, exactly, but the beginning of one. We walked my father to the car. My sister pled guilty 8 weeks later, which her attorney had advised after seeing the full scope of the documentary evidence. The plea agreement carried a sentence of 2 years probation, mandatory repayment of the full $100,000, and a restriction from serving in any financial management or fiduciary capacity for a period of 10 years. No prison time, given no prior record, and the restitution agreement. The judge noted in sentencing that the documentation submitted had been unusually complete, and that this had substantially constrained the court's discretion toward leniency. My sister did not look at me at the sentencing. I did not need her to. I flew back home 3 days later, on a cold Tuesday morning with a tight connection and the particular exhaustion that doesn't come from travel. I sat in the airport with a paper cup of coffee that was better than it had any right to be, and read through a new file my supervisor had sent me. A corporate fraud case, complex structure, 3 jurisdictions, the kind of thing that would take months and require absolute attention. I was good at absolute attention. My father called that evening. After I'd landed, he asked how my flight was. I told him it was fine. He said he was going to talk to his attorney about updating his documents properly. He said he hoped I knew that he was proud of me. He said it once, simply, without preamble or qualification. And then he asked how the new case was looking. "Complicated," I said, "but the numbers are all there. They always leave the numbers." He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "That's why you're good at this." I said thank you. We talked for another 10 minutes about nothing important, and it was the easiest conversation I could remember having with him in years. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment, clean lines, quiet, the particular piece of a space that belongs entirely to you, and opened the new case file on my laptop. The data ran down the screen in columns, precise and patient, waiting for someone to see the pattern. I started from the beginning. There's a version of this story where I'm supposed to feel like I won something, like the verdict was a finish line. But the thing nobody tells you about untangling fraud is that the work doesn't feel like victory, it feels like repair. Like taking something that's been deliberately made complicated and returning it to what it actually was. Simple. Documented. True. My family was not going to become a different family because of what happened. My mother was not going to become someone who had always seen me clearly. My sister was not going to become someone who hadn't done what she did. Those things don't reverse, but the lie was gone, and that mattered. The money was coming back, and that mattered. My father knew the truth, and that mattered most of all. I worked until midnight, then closed the laptop and went to bed. In the morning, I would start again. The numbers would still be there. They always were.